minutes. If you are entering the room, welcome. We will get started in about 1 minute. So if you can get yourself settled and the materials you may need, if you need a pen or notebook. Maybe take a quick stretch break. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are today. I want to thank you so much for joining us for the session 1D, Effective Teaming Practices for School Districts, Districts and Schools. Thank you for joining MTSS Fest 2021. If you are in need of any closed captioning today, you can get the closed captioning by pressing the CC button at the bottom of your screen. I'm Selena Journey, and I am the Educational School District 112 Implementation Coordinator for MTSS. And today I get the honor of presenting or introducing you Satish Moorthy. I also want to thank our sponsors for MTSS Fest, for Northwest PBIS, Kaiser Permanente, and the Office of Public Instruction for making the Zoom sessions today feasible. I want to introduce to you Satish, who comes from New York Department of Education, and he will be speaking with us today about effective teaming practices for districts and schools. Welcome, Satish, and I will pass off the screen to you.
Thank you, Selena. Okay, let me share my screen now. Should be ready to go in 1 second. All righty. Are you all able to see my my screen there? Excellent.
We are good to go.
Okay. All right, let me pull up the chat. So welcome everybody, and it's a real sincere pleasure for me to join you all here at MTSS Fest. It's exciting that there is a fest around MTSS. And I'm going to be talking about effective teaming practices for districts and schools. Yes, I am from New York City Department of Education. I'm a behavior specialist. Been working in positive behavior supports and school-wide PBIS for over 15 years, supporting schools and districts here in New York City specifically. And I'm actually in Brooklyn, New York right now. So and it's the afternoon. So I hope everyone's enjoying your morning out on the West Coast. So thank you all. And thanks to the sponsors and hosts that Selena introduced, and also to Selena and Taylor, who are here to support me in the session. And I'm really excited to be here. So let's get started. All right. Give me 1 second. It's slow and changing.
And I'll be monitoring the chat. And so as questions come up today, I will try to do my best to address them as we can, and we'll be using the chat throughout the session.
Great. So with that prompt, let's start with a little bit of time in the chat. This is helpful, so I get to know who's out there in the audience, and I know that we have school-based people and district-based. So if you just take a second, maybe to put your role if you're school-based, and then if you're district-based, then your role as well as your affiliation.
We have an array of people between MTSS coordinators, PBIS, intervention specialists, program managers, principals, teachers. Welcome to the session.
This is awesome. Oh, this is really awesome. I'm hoping I tried to tailor this session so that it could be broad enough for all folks, and we'll make sure that this presentation will be made available for you folks for later use, and we'll make sure we get that out to you. So this is great. Thank you all for sharing in the chat box. All right. Sorry about that, folks. I think there's just a little freeze. Okay. So we're going to continue in the chat box. And I just want to get a sense of, you can see here are a couple of prompts, just two things. One thing your group is doing well related to teaming. And then one way you or your group uses teaming to promote more equitable outcomes for all students. We'll just take a second to see if there's anything. And you can always put that in the chat box as we go along.
We'll give you a minute to get your responses in. Marcy, I love that commitment to continual growth. Involving multiple stakeholders. Building regular teams and meeting together. That team is so important, that shared leadership to MTSS.
Okay, great. And I appreciate folks for still putting in the chat box, and that's great. And this is going to be very important. I think it's important for just as we're a team today in this session. I think of us as a team, and it's nice to know each other. So I hope you guys are seeing, colleagues out there, and I think we're going to be able to learn from each other today. So quickly, an overview of today's session. We're going to discuss general considerations and best practices for teaming structures, as I said, both at school and district levels. And you'll see a lot of the principles and examples and best practices around teaming apply to both the school and district levels and the state level as well. And again, really there's a focus here that I'm trying to talk about, which is really about equitable outcomes and thinking about equity as a lens for this work around teaming and implementation of MTSS. So like I said, we're going to share school teaming practices across tiers and then I'm going to present a district case example, specifically New York City, and some of the policies, practices, and supports for schools that we're using. And I think they very much align with what I understand the state of Washington is doing. I am so excited to see this. That Washington State has a multi-tiered system of support framework. And really, if you look at that arrow, this is where we're going to be today, team-driven leadership. So very, very excited to be here. All right. So when we think about equitable outcomes, where do I start, right? We're individuals. We have varied backgrounds, as we saw in the chat box. We also have varied levels of experience. Some are new, I noticed, to their school or district, and some have been veterans in the system. So we always ask ourselves, where do I start and what's my point of entry? So I always like to think of, when we talk about point of entry, start with what do I care about, right? And what are my values around equity? Then thinking about skill sets, what am I good at? What can I contribute to the cause, to the whatever our school plan is or our district plan in supporting this? And then does it match my interest, my motivation? What do I want to do? And so I think about that as my own personal goals. Now, here's the big question is, how do I do it? Well, I think, as we know, it doesn't say, there's no I in team, right? So the answer is I can't do this alone. I need a team. So that's really what we're going to talk about. And whenever I think about teams, I just thought, what is the definition of a team? Often we use a lot of terminology and language, and it's very technical sometimes and very specific. I think it's important that we come up with common definitions of what we do. And so, I just said, look, what does Merriam-Webster have to say a team is? Well, it's a number of persons associated in work or activity. American Heritage defines as a group organized for work or activity. And I like these because they're very simple. It's associated together, and that could be loosely or very much organized. And so again, we want to move from that loose networks to really focused organization, and how does that fit into the structures we have both at the school and at the district level. So the general themes: shared values, shared goals, right? Shared motivation. And we're going to really talk about that today and what we're doing here in New York. And then thinking about complementary and interdependent actions, right? Everything we do affects others and affects folks in our own communities at school, but also across, in this case, the state of Washington. So it's exciting. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this, but I do want to talk about our layered systems of supports around multi-tiered. And again, because we're focusing on teams, we know about the evidence-based practices at tier 1, both academic and behavioral data, make decisions on which students need more intensive interventions or group interventions. And then finally, kids who really need intensive individualized interventions, whether academic or behavioral. But really the key piece here is we want to think about the teams that are going to be really implementing and supporting those practices. And this could be around training, coaching, right? And actually delivery of instruction. And really the key piece is, are they communicating with each other? And so we really want to think about integrated MTSS teams at the school level. And how are those tier 1, tier 2, or maybe tier 3 teams coordinating, thinking about communication protocols, and really sharing, right? We talk about shared leadership, that we're not working in silos. So this is just a graphic, I think, to try to pull all those things together. So again, let's revisit, right, that first slide. So where do I start? Revisited? Well, what's our point of entry, right, as a team? So we think about what we care about, right? What are our values? And so I think a lot of the work, and I'm sure a little later, is we're really focused on, before jumping to the good practices, before jumping to implementation, using the idea of implementation science, thinking about, we need to really, it's that exploration phase, that first phase where we're really looking at what resources do we have, who's good at what, how can we bring them, make sure everybody who is on that team is contributing and motivated, and thinking about how we can do this all together. So again, it's not just what can I do, it's what can I do contribute and whose support do I need, right? Oftentimes we jump in and I'm ready to go, but I may not know I need some supports or help. And so I think there's a lot of trust that needs to happen, so that teams, like that idea of team building, so that really teams can function well. And then that idea, and I think there's a modesty and humility to this, where I may not have to know all the answers, and that's okay. But perhaps my colleagues Selena or Taylor, they have the answer, or they have the skill set. And so it's really sharing that, and really supporting each other. So let's actually dig into this at the school level. And again, these are just considerations of who could be on our teams. And I guess for folks who are just starting new, you really want to think about the diversity of the folks who want to be there, right? The stakeholders. And again, I always think to myself, we want to think about skill sets. And that's also support, because we can coach and train each other. We all learn from each other, right? So think about skill sets. So all tiers, and again, where relevant and appropriate, we want to have data people. We want to have an internal MTSS, or if you're doing PBIS, coach, or a behavior or academic specialist. We want general and special ed teachers together, right? Teacher teams. Definitely need administrators. There's a lot of research on the importance of administrator, not just support, but participation. So that important decisions around scheduling, resource allocation, et cetera, both at the school and district level, that those are the folks who can get that to happen. We want to make sure they're at the meetings. Family representatives, student representatives as appropriate. And then definitely community representatives, thinking about any community agencies, supports, thinking about mental health and other types of supports that really can, right, thinking about the school itself as a locus for, but really part of a whole child approach, that the community is also involved. And so we want to think about that. And again, good teams always have scheduled meetings, regular meetings, minutes, notes, action plans, right, timelines, all those important good things. So we need to have folks who are able to coordinate. And again, that's where administrators are so important, because they can allocate that time for that individual or individuals to do that work, to support the team process. For folks who are doing PBIS, I do want to say and point to the tiered fidelity inventory, which I think many of you will be familiar with at the school level. And you can find this at www.pbis.org. But I think it's really important to note when we're talking about teaming, that is actually the first two features of the tiered fidelity inventory, but at all three tiers. And if you look there, it's very important. You can see the kinds of diversity that are, right, this is a research validated tool, that these are the folks we want to make sure are on the team, because having them there, right, not just as the voice, but also moving from stakeholder voice, but also to the operating procedures, which is really about agency and action, that we can do something, that we're doing something that's going to support kids and improve outcomes, academic and behavioral. So just want to point that out there, that if we're doing these things, we're definitely right on the right track with what we know is the evidence base for implementation. So folks who are doing PBIS, and again, this applies to improving outcomes, and this could be instructional, behavioral, social, emotional, and supporting mental health, but this does come from PBIS. But these main elements, and the important piece here is, if we're thinking about equity, right, we're thinking about high expectations for each student, right, so that's our outcomes. The important piece is we really want to look at the data, right, and folks I think mentioned, and they're good at trying to make sure that they're using data to make those decisions about which kids may need more tier 2 supports, or may need more individualized supports. And as we think about equity, we want to really think about data by student group or subgroup, by race, ethnicity, gender, et cetera. So it's important to have that data with you so you can see any patterns, right, if we're thinking about equity. We're adapting our practices to meet the needs, right, and the values and really supporting kids. And finally, right, these systems, and this is real, we're all here, right? We're the leaders, we're the educators, we're the district administrators, the principals, et cetera. How are we supporting our teams, right? Our teacher teams to actually work and use the evidence-based practices and implement well, right? So some of this may be technical, but I think it's really helpful to have a sort of framework that we're looking at. So along with our MTSS framework, how do we do this well, right? And again, equity being a lens that we want to do. So just quickly unpacking some of these elements at the school level, we would look around data. What data do we need to make equitable decisions? Do we have access to that? And how can we use it? Again, that's where those data mavens out there who really know how to create Excel spreadsheets or charts that can present that to the team and help us analyze are very important. How do we, as being part of this team of educators, benefit students? What is the actual connection between the good practices and the teaching with, right, the student learning and better outcomes? And how does data inform our practice? When we look at systems, right, thinking about each of us are on, I think some of us probably, if we've been doing this, are on 8 teams, right? Does anybody feel like that? And it's almost like, which meeting are we at now? And we're thinking about how we can integrate. Remember that slide about integrated teams? And again, I think oftentimes, sometimes we'll see there's, oh, the student has an IEP, well then there's that special ed team that's working around this. And then there's the other, and how do we really truly integrate this work? And I think folks in the chat box have talked a little bit about that. So thinking about co-teacher teams, grade level, department teams, then how are they communicating with each other? Thinking about student support, social emotional learning teams, and then of course, for students who do have IEPs, we want to think about the connection there, right? Remember that tier 1 green is universal, it's for all students. So this is right around access and inclusion. And so we want to make sure that we are really paying attention to that. I'm going to come back to the idea of voice and agency and really thinking about, are we able to, right, create actionable goals and tasks, and are we able to actually implement them, right, and progress monitor them. Finally, when you think about systems to support us, all of us are learning. I'm constantly learning and thinking about what professional learning opportunities are available to us. I think MTSS Fest is a great example of a professional learning opportunity for all of us, and making sure that we're always looking for those opportunities and availing ourselves to them to grow. Okay, we're going to move into in a second to a first time for a Q&A spot. And I think we're doing really well on time, so I think we're okay. So that last element, we talk about practices, right? Those evidence-based practices that meet needs and shared values. So these are going to be 3 prompts. I'm going to show them again in a second, but I want to just read them out. So take a second to start thinking about and how you might want to share in the chat box. But what can we do, right, as teams to improve more equitable outcomes for students? What do I need from my team or teams, and what can I contribute? And finally, how can MTSS or PBIS principals support us as educators in our practice? So we're going to go, and this is the prompt. And what you can do, just so that we can code it, you can put, you can code it as number 1, and then any responses or feedback to that question, the first one. If it's number 2, and you can pick one, you can pick them all, but let's take a few minutes, a couple minutes, and please do share. And I sincerely appreciate everyone's participation in the chat box. This is really great to see the engagement.
I think Satish, while people are thinking on that, Anne brought something up in the chat box earlier about emotional safety to be able to share when you're part of a team, even when you disagree, and thinking about you have your social emotional learning at a tier 1 level, we have to create safety and opportunities within our team to build trust so that we can effectively collaborate. And high functioning teams do disagree, but they disagree respectfully. So Anne, thank you so much for pointing that out today.
Much appreciated. That is so correct. And I think it's important. Even I'll just give you I love real examples in the world as people are still putting in there. Taylor, Selena, and myself, we met earlier in the week just to talk about what our roles are and what we need to do together. And all of that is important to take that time so that, you know, we can right, that emotional safety, that ability to share and listen as well. Thank you.
I'm seeing a few things around, collaboration and not siloing our departments, working together. That practices are grounded in data. Jennifer, to answer your question, I don't know if Taylor will be able to compile all these. I think we do have a picture of the chat when we're done, so we'll see if we can work towards that and get the information out to you later. Michael says we first need to use data to understand where our inequities exist. There's a lot of messages in here, Satish, so you go ahead and
All right. No,
if you
I'm
want to
reading
point
them
at any
myself.
of them.
No, I'm reading myself. These are awesome. I want some
Yeah.
of these too. I hope we can get that chat. Okay, so,
Yeah.
but I'm really seeing the importance of data, using that to support decision making. And I see Mike wrote it there at the end, dedication to the process. I think really honoring what we know from implementation science, making sure, and what we know from MTSS, but really thinking about knowing we can't just get this. It's not all going to happen all at once, right? That there's going to be stages, right, of implementation that we want to. And I think there's a importance that, you know, even if we don't reach all of our goals, but you know, celebrate what we did accomplish as a team. Uh, and I think, you know, I'll say it, you know, a lot of forgiveness and saying, you know, it's okay that we didn't get everything done, but you know what? Just in the same way, um, we work with, you know, goals, approximation towards goal, you know, for students, you know, for us as well. And I think, again, applying, and I love that folks are talking about applying so many of those things we think about for our students and supporting, right, them. How are we supporting each other, right? And clearly this past year and a half has been a real challenge, right, for all of us. And I think that it's really important that we also take care of each other. So I love all the comments, and it does look like Taylor will be able to save the chat, so that's great. So okay, let's move on. All right, great. But now I'm going to move into a district example, and that's going to be New York City. And this is what we're trying to do. And again, I'm going to be very, we're still in the exploration and installation phase, right? And I think we've been learning, we've been trying to do equity work for a number of years, but I think when we've become smarter, and we've had the great pleasure of actually having Dr. Karen Ward support our state and us in thinking about implementation science and thinking about how to really do this thoughtfully and deliberately. So here are just some of the basic points. We're going to talk a little about how we're moving from exploration into that first installation phase. Right, and remembering that it could take 3 to 5 years, but that's with deliberate, right? That's both at the school level as well as you're thinking about districts. Alignment, and I'm going to talk about, and I think this is something that I think all of you are doing there in Washington State, and I've learned just from learning from your framework. I'll definitely be thinking about how some of those things can support what we're doing. Aligning that to our state and local initiatives and policies around equity. Again, teaming and communication protocols, now really focusing on the district level. And thinking about readiness activity. That idea of readiness is so important. Thinking about what features, what do we really need to do, right, so that we can actually move this work forward. And again, that could be our personal self-work, and it could also be for the teams. Okay, so just quickly, sorry, there's a lot of information on this, but I just do want to take a second in sharing this district example. We are a large, we're actually 32 plus districts, because if you look, we have 1,800 schools across all the 5 boroughs, right? Just in the city, that's Brooklyn. I'm in Brooklyn. Queens, Manhattan, Bronx, and Staten Island, and there are specialists like me working in each of these boroughs, and we're part of a team as well. But like I said, we have 32 school districts, so it's coordinating across, right? You can almost think about New York City almost as its own state, it's so big. 1.1 million students in our public school system in the city. And if you look at the demographics, 72.8%, economically disadvantaged, 20.2% students with disabilities, and 13.2% of students are English language learners. So we have a diversity of backgrounds, and equity, I think, is a very important it's front and center in our work. And you can see by race, ethnicity, over 40% Hispanic, over a quarter are Black, 16.2% Asian, and about 15% are White. So again, this is just to give a little context for folks as I move forward. So thinking about whether it's individual district, one of those 32, or thinking citywide, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, is applying the same principles, like I said, from thinking about school teams. Who do we need on our district teams, right, to move this work forward? And again, skill sets, right? And it's so important. So at all levels, right, whether it's an individual district or if it's citywide, and we're thinking about same thing. We need those data people who can really bring the information together, present it in a way so that we can analyze it, right? We can't meet for 3 hours. We may only have 30 minutes. So we need to have that data in a very digestible, simple way. We need academic and behavioral specialists. We need school psychologists, we need everybody, mental health folks there. We need our trainers and coaches. I think that there are a number of people on this that would consider them, or their role is a trainer or a coach in providing technical assistance. That's what I do. We need our folks in thinking about when we talk about emotional safety and safety, student support services and mental health leaders. And that could also, again, community representatives. Obviously, district administration, the more they are directly involved with the work, the more that they can catch something and help us move something forward, as opposed to reports, 3 months in, and then it's like, oh, actually we need to do this now. And we spent all this time. So thinking of how we can really loop them in. If they can't join, it's understandable. How can we create communication protocols and loops so that they are informed and can support us in a more immediate way? And again, always thinking about family and community engagement partnerships, agencies, both local, maybe county, or statewide, et cetera, and thinking about how they can be a part of this work, so that we're really bringing in, I think so many folks have put in the chat, bringing in a family voice, student voice into this work. So here's what we did, right? And I might encourage folks to start here again, just like we defined what a team is. Okay, great, let's schedule meetings. And here we go, we're excited. What's the purpose of the team, right? If any of you joined a team or been asked to join a team, or voluntold, as they say, to go on a team, and you're like, okay, great, what is the purpose of this team? I think it's so important. So I'm just going to give you a quick example here, right? And we have a behavior specialist network. And so we realized that if we're going to have these meetings, what is the purpose of this network? And so this is just an example. And I think a lot of this, it so aligns with your MTSS framework. But right, to provide consistency in content, TA, and delivery of positive behavior support. Again, this is, I'm a behavior specialist, so let's focus on the positive behavior support side. But you can also think about academic supports or mental health supports. Providing a platform for accessible sharing, right? We'll make sure those evidence-based resources and materials both within and across teams. So again, there's a lot of protocols, communication, and in terms of being able to share good information in a timely and appropriate manner. Again, and this is right, this is all implementation science, right? We want to make sure we're using our, they call it an innovation, a usable innovation. This is the MTSS framework, and we're thinking about systems change, right? And again, it takes time. I want to talk a little bit about how we've thought about this change work, but for schools, districts, family, and community partners to promote more equitable, right, outcomes for all students. So defining this and having it there, so every time we meet, I put this slide just to remind us this is what we're doing. And perhaps this meeting, we're going to talk about a specific area related to evidence-based resources, but it just kind of grounds us. And it's like, right, that behavioral, social, emotional, that prompt. Hey guys, this is what we agreed on. And we can always change it, right? But here's where we are. So share that. Talk a little bit about how we're leveraging both state and city policies. And so for folks who are starting this work and maybe are also in the exploration or moving into installation, this is what we're doing. Our state has adopted formally adopted a culture responsive sustaining framework. And the 4 main components: welcoming and affirming environment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment, ongoing professional learning and support. I'm very excited to see that this so aligns with what we're trying to do around MTSS, right? PBIS, and uses implementation science. The key piece why I bring this up is when we're doing this work at our city level, I'm like, hey guys, this is important, check it out, right? The state is supporting this work. We are so, and people are very excited because I think you guys have it too, but each school, right, has a comprehensive education plan that includes all this with our goals around student outcomes. And we want to make sure that it is aligned, right, with what's going on with the state. So it's thinking about how to leverage those things. What's wonderful is we have a local initiative, right? The city has done this. So our chancellor's office, and again, this chancellor is above all the supernets for the whole system, has an initiative on equity and excellence for all, right? And very much aligned with the state guidelines and framework. And I would love here, and it's highlighted, that it requires a thoughtful and deliberate approach, right? I think that's so important when we talk about those opportunity and achievement gaps, that we're thoughtful and deliberate, right? And that we are making sure that we are thinking about actionable steps, thinking about how to allocate resources and skills and everything in a really the best way possible. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but we're trying. And again, this is exciting that we have something like this, and I think it's very much similar to
Satish,
what
may
you
I
guys are
interrupt real
doing.
quick and make a
Sure.
connection in the chat? So
Oh,
in the
lovely.
chat, there was a conversation going around about valued behavior and norms and that they're inclusive. And when you think about Satish's slide, true previously about being culturally responsive and having a warm and welcoming environment, sometimes people will say that PBIS is done to students by the adults creating the norms of the school. But when you think about that family, student, and community engagement piece and looking at your frameworks to allow inclusivity and to allow culturally responsiveness in your schools, thinking about what does your PBIS framework look like? Are they norms that students of color would agree with, or that your group of students would align with? And so thinking about what do your norms look like and allow that opportunity to have student voice and sharing in part of the PBIS process. I think that kind of connects with what happened, the conversation in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, Selena. Yeah, that's really wonderful. And I think that inclusiveness also, right, thinking about student voice, and I would only add family voice as well, and making sure that, because often, right, we know this, our kids come to to class or come to enter the building, and so much has already maybe happened beforehand at home or on the way to school, or just life circumstances that
in the community.
Yeah, and particularly it's so much right in front of us today, and with thinking about whether it's remote or virtual learning or in person or staggered, that blended environments, and just what's happening, like you said, in the communities, and so that we can really make sure that the school environment is really connecting, right? That's that culture responsive piece. So much appreciated. Thank you for bringing that in, Selena, and tying those things together. So back to sort of the logistics. What do we do next, right? So we're leveraging. We have a team purpose. So I want to connect it back to implementation of science and talk a little bit about what that exploration or readiness phase has looked like. And it's really about establishing district commitment, right? So what we've done is we've created a district citywide leadership team and interdisciplinary committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And it's multiple stakeholders, and that includes trainers, coaches, TA folks, specialists like myself, but also folks from HR, folks from the budget office, folks from everybody, so that we're really thinking not just about supporting schools, but our own practices, right? Personnel, how are we hiring? Who are we hiring? Who's on, right? And are we really, is the diversity of our teams reflective of the diversity of our communities, right? Again, we do have our weekly meetings. We want to make sure that we have good agendas, right, and action plans, and folks are taking ownership of tasks. We've been doing some, and I think I talked a little bit about this earlier, but really thinking about stakeholder awareness and team building, and some of the things we're talking about, right, again, as I said, across different workflows or departments, so that we really are working together and learning from each other. And finally, it's so important, again, thinking again about making sure we have good definitions of the things we're doing, making sure that we have a common purpose, right, and define that purpose. And then finally, developing a theory of action statement. So I'm going to really conclude today about sharing a little bit more about the theory of action that we are using, and how and unpacking that a little bit, and that'll lead into a final kind of Q&A around the district levels. So in terms of our theory of action, our equity theory of action, right? So, and again, theories of action, just as a reminder, a refresher, right? We mean if X and Y, we're going to then get to those those valued outcomes. So, so if X is if we have our shared beliefs and values on equity. So if we have those, if we establish them, that takes a lot of work, right? That's part of that those important conversations. And again, you guys have pointed out, trust is so important, so that we really can sit down and say, maybe I might not agree with that, but you know what, I'm going to learn more and try to figure that out, right? Okay, our actions and behaviors to support equity. Those are those evidence-based practices. Those are all those team meetings and the action plans. We believe that we can get to those outcomes. So I'm going to unpack a little bit of that and frame it in the sense of hearts, minds, and behaviors, right? And wherever your entry point is, again, this is all a theory of change, and I'll give you the citation. Comes out of the work of Gusky. Changing in teaching practices, right, can lead to a change in student outcomes, and then a change in beliefs and attitudes. Now, whichever way you start, you want to find, again, remember think about entry point. For us, we're trying change, start our entry point is changing beliefs and attitudes with the hope that we can move those, but find out wherever your entry point is. And so if you really do have strong teaching practices and strong policies and supports, we want to end up with that change in support and student outcomes, but sometimes if the beliefs and attitudes don't match, what's the work we can do to really connect these? So unpacking this idea of hearts, right, or feelings, some of the guiding questions we've used is, again, how do I feel about equity personally? But then how does my community feel about it? And are these compatible? Why or why not, right? Having discussions about that and doing that self-work, I think it's so important, we've found at least, so that we can build relationships. I think a lot of our trust building is that, hey, I think I just misunderstood what you were saying, and actually we're really talking about the same thing, but maybe I'm from a different department or a different area, or maybe I use different, I'm actually a social worker by background, and if I talk to somebody as a pedagogue or a teacher, we may be trying to do the same thing, but maybe we're in a different discipline and we have different words for a different language. So it's creating common language, right? Thinking about implicit and explicit bias, both personally, but also thinking about in terms of our institutional systems and contexts, right? That's that community, right? Thinking about that. And if we think about like kind of the domain, this is that area of social emotional behavior and mental health development, right? In personal and professional context. I think everywhere, and I'm pretty sure, imagine in Washington and your districts, there are professional learning opportunities around a lot of this, but making those connections from that personal work to my professional and our teamwork so that we can move things forward. Moving over to thinking, right? This is that cognitive process, right? When we think about changing hearts and minds, some of the guiding questions, right? What's happening to create and sustain disparities, right? And folks really talked about that in the chat box, right? The data doesn't lie, and if it's there, we just have to look and say, why is this happening, right? Thinking about root cause analysis. And again, in this area, awareness, building knowledge, skill sets, again, these are all technical things, but, talking about a problem of practice, right? We know the evidence-based practices, we know what to do, but why are they not being implemented, right? And there's that gap in implementation, for example, and that could be a problem of practice. That's something that we see a lot of, and trying to bridge that, right? And that's those teams really making that happen. And then finally, the last piece, right? Hearts, minds, behaviors. This is the doing, right? What can we do? How do we do it, right? How do we know our actions made a difference? So that ongoing progress monitoring, and I think also that's the hard data, but also soft data, like surveys, right? Making sure that we're getting the stakeholder voice. And then again, back to implementation science, right? Improvement cycles, plan, do, study, act, PDSA, right? What can we do differently next time, next cycle, next year, in 3 years, right? So starting with small pieces and then building, right? Those plans. And again, making sure everything we're doing is measurable, and how do we best measure this change? So again, I talked a little about here's another area about things of theory of change, and there are 2 types of change we can talk about, right? And again, connected very much to what we've been talking about just now. Those technical change, use of specific strategies, tools, and interventions, right? And that's where a lot of times is just administrators, making sure scheduling, making sure we have access, making sure that we're able to go to professional learning. But really that adaptive change is really the tough work, right? Because not everything is that easy, right? You can use the TFI, the reading TFI, or the behavioral TFI and follow all the things, right? And you're going to say, but did it work or didn't it work? And again, I think Selena talked about that community piece is really that shift, right, in beliefs and attitudes, and making sure that, and this is the hard part, right? Not everything works perfectly, that we need to be able to adapt our practices, right? And that's where, again, progress monitoring, making sure that we understand and looking at root causes. And sometimes the root causes may be our own biases, and trying to be aware of that and thinking about how we can change. So again, it's the how and the why, and pulling these things together. A lot of this is, as you can see, is all very readiness and beginning work. So again, now again, I talked about starting with changing in beliefs and attitudes. Naguski, you guys are familiar, And again, it's how to make lasting change happen in schools. And what it seems to be found is that, changing in teaching practices, right, and seeing actually outcomes can actually support that change in beliefs and attitudes. So if you guys have good examples of how good evidence-based instructional practices have actually improved student outcomes, and you can show that and bring that to meetings, bring that to district meetings, bring that to school team meetings, grade level meetings, then you're gonna be like, so what were you doing? Oh, you did that behavioral matrix and you taught the behaviors explicitly, and then you started to see what a reduction in problem behaviors and kids engaged and on, in their work. And you know what? Maybe I'll try it. Maybe I misunderstood what that thing is, right? And let me learn more about that, right? And so, that belief that kids can grow, that that adults can grow, that we can support each other. And so just thinking of, and again, there are different ways of entry points, like I said, but I just wanted to share a couple of different ones. And again, this is very helpful, we found, to make sure as we look at, gee, it didn't work that time. Maybe we need to show how it is working in order to get folks to get on board with this, right? So again, and I see Mikhail, our district is starting with changing in teaching practices, which is great, but we really need to work on changing beliefs and attitudes. Great. And again, I don't know if this slide would be helpful, but if you could think about showing good data on students, perhaps you can get those added, shifts in the hearts and the minds. So finally, lessons learned. Okay, invest in teaming structures and communication protocols. So important. Again, with all the layers, silos and layers and teams, and so how do we make sure that happens, right? They have to exist, but you know what? Let's do better. Be more efficient, right? Thinking about those shared beliefs and values, and then, again, as a social worker and a human development sort of background, I think of this. So I share this thinking about human developmental approach, right? And those are what we care about, our values, our norms, right? So important. And then what are we doing, right? I think often we're asked, right, as professionals at the school or district level, okay, this needs to happen, get it done. Team, do it, come back. But if we don't pay attention to, right, that piece, it may not work, right? And so just trying to think about that connection, right? So our next steps, right, in terms of promoting equity, we're doing surveys of district audiences, and what are, again, our different points of entry. We're gathering resources and doing our own self-study. Again, that idea of professional learning opportunities, bringing it back, sharing with the team, making time for that. And we're actually trying to create sub-teams, right? We're in the process of this, but sub-teams around those ideas, right? Of folks who might be more thinking about how do we shift how we think about, in terms of bias or connections. We've got our data folks who are really about let's get this together. So creating sub-teams around how to really think about doing this work better. And then there are those folks who are like, you guys do all that stuff, I'm ready to go. I'll take care. I'll be on the action planning team, right? And so finding out who, right, motivation, and making sure, everybody may not want to be on each of these teams, getting the folks to want to be a part and motivate. Again, as a behavioral person, right, motivation is so important. So finally, and let me just check the time here. Okay, about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Selena. I want to make sure, though, just as we don't want to get a little bit of time for Q&A, but and I can go this a little quicker because we've gone through the elements. Now I'm going to apply the same elements around equity, right, but now to the district level. So if we think about data to support equity at the district level, what do we need, right, at the district level? And how does being a part of a team of district administrators and teacher leaders benefit schools, right? We can have wonderful plans. We can go to conferences, we can learn, but how's that information, how is that supporting schools and getting to the classroom level and to the family level and student, and thinking about that. And how does, right, those are the practices. Systems that support us. So which teams, just like at the school level, I think many of us, I'm on, I think three of these teams, right? So how do I connect back, right? And thinking about even at the district level, you may be teaching and learning, but then there's a special ed. Are we talking together, right? How are we thinking about all of that together? Student support services, operations is so important, so we can make sure there's allocation for whether it's budgets or allocation of resources, right? Space, what have you. Family and community engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion. So where do I have voice and agency, and where can I make those connections across? And this is where, again, senior leadership, superintendent, that really, if they're a part of this work, they can make sure that we're all connected together, right? This is truly that idea of integrated MTSS teams, right? And then now we're talking about at the district level. So this is going to lead to our last Q&A. Is again, these are the 3 prompts. So I'm going to jump to it. It's around practices. So what can we do to improve more equitable outcomes for schools and school teams? So this is again for the district level. What do I need from my teams? What can I contribute? And how can the MTSS PBIS principals support us as educator, administrators, and leaders in our practice? So, and again, if you want to code it, 1, 2, or 3, please do. While that's happening, as you're thinking, I do sincerely appreciate, I love the chat. Folks are asking questions, and then colleagues are saying, I'll email you, I got some stuff for you. That's so great. This is beautiful.
We've just
awesome.
built a team right there. They're building a team of support.
Awesome.
I did see the questions coming through, and while you're thinking on those, it's for particularly the smaller districts. I'm newer to this position, and I'm finding that I have some districts sitting at 32 staff total. And MTSS is it's an incredible lift. And so my question to you, without having any information, is how are your professional learning communities functioning? How are your teacher teams functioning? And do they have opportunities throughout their PLC process to look at the data to help identify what does the attendance look like in the interventions or the supports? What students are consistently accessing or needing tier 2 or tier 3 supports. So I'm of the belief that the PLCs are the foundation of much of the MTSS work. And so that would be my first question to you is, how are those teams, those PLC teams functioning?
But I'm seeing Emery is responding as well, thinking about the purpose of each of those teams and who's on those teams and how do they communicate with one another. It's that process, right? Honoring and really paying attention to that. But yes, right? Just to say you have a team may not be the best way of doing things, right? Why are we having this team? And a lot of the early work around PBIS and I believe around academic supports around MTSS is looking, right, before we create new teams, let's look at the current teams and start to integrate them where there are overlaps, right? Whether it's a smaller school, but even at a larger school. Just may not have as many people on the team, right? But that's fair. Great, and I'm going to ask folks to continue with that, and I think that Taylor's going to be able to get us that chat, but honoring your time and everybody in this room, our team today. Thank you all so much for having me to present and share and learn from you guys, and I am so excited that this is great. An MTSS Fest. I'm going to bring this idea back. We need to celebrate. I love it. It's a celebration. That's exactly what we need to do. So thank you. And that's my email down there. And if you want to reach out for anything, that's great. And but like I said, we're going to make sure the PowerPoint can get to folks, or and I'll work with Taylor to get that. And then I think the chat as well will be here. So thank you. And I'm going to turn it now back to Selena to close us up.
Yes, Satish, thank you so much for joining us today on behalf of OSPI. We want to thank you, and thank you to all of those who attended the session today. In closing, all of the, if you have additional questions that start to come up, you can email them. They call it sissel at k12.wa. And you can put Satish's name in there in the session. This is 1D, and we can address some of those questions. Presentation material will be available on August 18th, and clock hours will be awarded no later than August 31st. And then, as noted earlier, we will do our best to get the chat information uploaded, and then presentation materials will also be uploaded and linked in the archive section. So again, thank you so much today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great day. Go take a good stretch break.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.